A child does best, on average, when raised by biological married parents.
I will fight for Australia's rights, our freedoms, our way of life.
I'm an anti-feminist because I think it's oppressive, I think it's anti-male, I think it's anti-femininity.
Now, it may be a very weak Brexit, but I tell you what, Brexit of any kind and leaving those treaties as well.
That's the best ever interview. Well, Michael Parkinson, you got nothing on this bloke.
G'day, I'm Dave Pellowe and welcome to Pellowe Talk. Today I have a person to introduce you to that you may have already heard of or you may not. Bindi Cole Chocka is one of the people who was party to the complaints against Andrew Bolt several years ago, nearly 10 years ago now, I think 7, 8, 9, 10. And the complaint against him at that stage was under Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, language that was likely to offend someone. Andrew Bolt was found guilty of hurting somebody's feelings because of comments that he made which pertained to the way they identified racially. Now, what's remarkable about that, of course, the battle against limiting free speech and the battle for free speech is being covered many times. But what's really, really interesting is that one of those people, Bindi, has actually had a change of mind since then. And this story, this turning around and going in a completely different direction, is very rare and quite refreshing in political debate. These days, minds are hard to change. People seem to be stuck and dogmatic in their position. They see it as a personal insult when you attack their ideas. And something I always try and do, and we all should try and do, is attack bad ideas, but never people, because individuals and identities aren't what we're trying to debate. We're trying to get the best ideas possible and tackle difficult issues so that we can move forward, which is why we need free speech, so we can be critical, so people can get their feelings out of the road and focus on the facts. So when I heard about Bindi, I was, like so many other people who've heard her story of change, really, really impressed at the intellectual honesty and the raw courage it takes to put your hand up and say, I got that wrong, and I'm more interested in truth than my feelings. So it's really, really great privilege to get into this conversation in the next half hour or so, and I'd like you to keep your hands on the steering wheel, but otherwise give a clap wherever you are for Bindi Cole Chocka. Bindi, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, for those who haven't heard of you before, tell us a little bit about who you are and why people might have heard of you prior to the legal case with Andrew Bolt.
Well, I'm an artist, and I was an artist 10 or 12 years ago as well, and I made art about identity, which I continue to do so today. And so when I first began making art, I was fortunate enough to have some of my initial artwork become reasonably well known quite quickly. And one of the reasons why I ended up in the court case with Andrew Bolt is because he saw one of my artworks. And so he kind of pushed that out nationally and helped me to be established as an artist, even if it was in a kind of infamous
critically
way.
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, I think people might know me for my art, potentially.
Sure. So your art's been in lots of the national galleries and you've done tours with your art. And I think, I'm not sure which publication or organisation actually put this list together, but at one stage you were ranked in the top 100 of most influential people in Melbourne.
Correct. In the last 10 years, I think I've had about 25 solo exhibitions, 60 group shows, won or placed in about 15 art prizes. I think I've been finalist in about 15 art prizes, won or placed in 6 of them. So in terms of the art world, everybody in the art world knows who I am.
Sure. And
then some beyond, probably more so just because of the case that I was a part of and because my art speaks as a form of social commentary. It's a personal narrative, but often taps into social commentary.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, can you describe the artwork? And if I can find a photo of it, I'll insert it here. But if I have your permission. But what was the artwork that Andrew was commenting on, and what were his comments? But tell us about the artwork, what it looks like, what your message was with it, and Andrew's criticisms.
So this was probably the second photographic series that I ever made, and at the time I was in my 20s. I had come out of a life that had been very difficult and had left me quite fragmented and shredded in some ways, and I was using art as a methodology to explore my identity. And one of the first ways in which I decided to explore my identity was to look at it racially. And growing up as a child, I'm clearly mixed heritage, but one of my racial identities is Indigenous. My father has Indigenous heritage. And so growing up, the only racial identity that was ever really acknowledged to me was my Aboriginal identity. And so I decided that I was going to make an artwork that that looked at that, but particularly looked at the tensions that identity produced in me. I think I've always been interested in tension and discomfort. The things that make me uncomfortable are the things that I tend to want to pull out and have a good look at, rather than turn away from them. I still do that.
Kind of the human
today.
It's kind of the human condition, isn't it? Exploring our pain, our suffering, our searches.
Yeah, that's right. But what you tend to do when you're interested in that is then make everybody else uncomfortable. So I realised that I was identifying as Aboriginal, but I was fair-skinned, and that made other people uncomfortable. And I also realised that there was a narrative at the time that continues today that says that if you're fair-skinned and you identify as Aboriginal, you're doing so because you're opportunistic and there's a gravy train that you can get on board, and that there's career and political clout to be had for identifying as Aboriginal. Now, I think there are many, many people who probably do that. However, at the time I was genuine in my seeking and exploring of my identity. I wasn't really thinking about any of those things because I wasn't even really aware of politics and a whole range of things at the time. And so I made a series of photographs of portraits of myself and my family in blackface. And I guess what I was trying to do was turn myself into the stereotype that I thought everybody wanted to see.
I get that.
and I didn't really think through the decisions that I was making as an artist. I think through them more now because I understand the implications of what I do more. But at the time I wasn't, and I made this series of work and I put it out into the world, and I called it Not Really Aboriginal, and it was a genuine expression of where I was at the time. And he saw that, Andrew Bolt, and he said that, what did he say? He said that identifying racial differences that nobody can see is a waste of time. And over the next 2 years, he wrote about me numerous times, using me as the poster child for this narrative of a fair-skinned person identifying as Aboriginal because they're opportunistic.
And listening to it from your perspective, I can see how that would have put your nose out of joint. That that this was a genuine expression of identity and self-vision for you, how you saw yourself, and not something political. You just didn't think about it with that level of sophistication. Can I use that word?
Yes, you can, absolutely. I mean, and where I am today is another 10 years culmination of the same seeking journey that I began back then.
Yeah. Did you answer back? Did you engage in the dialogue or the debate and say, Andrew Bolt, you're full of crap, some people may, but I don't, or, go to hell, who cares what you think? Were there any other recourses for you before you pulled the lawfare trigger?
No, there really wasn't any other recourse for me. I just kind of wore it.
Did you feel there was a lack of options and that was your only option, or did you just go straight to lawfare? Despite there being other options.
Yeah. So I wore it for about 2 years, at which point I was approached by a law firm to, I was approached by a law firm to ask if I wanted to take recourse along with a number of other people that were in a similar boat to me. So this is the thing. I absolutely wanted to defend my character.
Cool. Sure, I get that.
Yep. I didn't
It's just a shame a journalist didn't approach you first and say, hey, do you want me to help you show your side of the story? Or other things like that. I mean, I'm sure the ABC would have loved to run Andrew Bolt is wrong and here's why kind of articles. I think I may have had a little bit of press, but not a lot, and nothing that was particularly in depth or an opportunity to really have serious recourse. But at the time, I didn't even really understand. I didn't understand that I was entering into a higher philosophical argument about free speech. I just wanted to defend my character. When I entered into the court case, again, I didn't really comprehend that the laws that we were using were about setting quite a strong precedence around limiting free speech. I just wanted to defend my character the entire time. And so why I'm speaking out now is because I played such a big part in building this structure, giving the government overreach into our lives in terms of speech based on offence and humiliation. And I now feel it's my responsibility to help tear down that structure that I helped to create. In hindsight, it doesn't necessarily mean that I wouldn't have taken Andrew Bolt to court. I just wish I had have used defamation laws rather than the Racial Discrimination Act. Yeah, I think defamation laws are too liberal in Australia as well. It's far too easy, but that's a slightly different topic. I'd like to explore this a whole lot because this is the political aspect which is fascinating, but at the same time your whole life story is really, really interesting for the arc of it that you're halfway through but have yet come so far already. And the details which are out there in public, so I'm not betraying any confidence. I've spent some time on your YouTube channel and listened to your story and been very moved by the things you've gone through. And you know, for those who have no idea at all who Bindi Cole Chocka is, you know, the daughter of a mother who was addicted to heroin and a stripper and a prostitute. That sometimes when there was no other options for you for your day, you actually went to the strip club, or was it the brothel or just the strip club?
The strip club.
The strip club with her. Lovely place for a child. And that, you know, you actually got removed from your mother because of her incapacity to look after you for a number of years. You lived with your grandmother, and then you did get reunited with your mother at about, was it 15?
13.
13. And then at the age of 16, your mother tragically died, which absolutely devastated your life. You were alone and financially responsible for yourself with nothing more than a government payment. And one way or another, you ended up in jail in the United Kingdom for a couple of years. And then you made, I love the story. Look, I'm just really highlighting it. I encourage people, I'll put the link beneath this video so you can listen to Bindi telling the story in her own words. It takes about 45 minutes and it's gripping. I absolutely loved the account. But on the way back from England, you got given business class upgrade when they knew who you were. The only person kicked out of the country in business class.
That's right.
I like that line. And yeah, really, really great story. So there's this long trail of brokenness and struggle and lots of really good reasons to feel like you're a victim that's been kicked around by life prior to coming up to this event with Andrew Bolt. Now, in spite of all that, you actually had achieved a lot of profile, a lot of success in the art world. So yeah, now where I want to give back to you to tell your story is tell us about this this road to Damascus experience, where you've had a 180-degree turn, both philosophically and politically and spiritually.
Well, it began in prison. It began the very first day I was locked up. And to tell that story, I probably need to just give a little intro into me getting locked up. So I ended up in London when I was about 22, 23, and I was already a drug addict. I didn't take heroin like my mum because I thought I'm not going to be like her, so I just took all the party drugs instead. And when I decided to go to London, which a lot of people were doing back then who were my age, I just kind of picked up where I left off. The first day I arrived in London, I found a dealer and I used drugs. And within a year or so of being in London, I was 42 kilos.
Wow.
Overdosing. I think I overdosed 3 times. I was defibrillated. I was going into a drug-induced psychosis regularly and getting hospitalized for that because I wouldn't sleep for maybe 3 or 4 days on end.
Wow.
And I had this sense that I was going to die. I knew that if I didn't stop what I was doing, I would die. My heart couldn't take much more, but I couldn't stop. I was so, I was in such a stronghold of addiction that I had no control. And so I remember trying to get help. I remember knocking on the doors of rehabs in London, trying to see if they would take me in. No one would take me in. And then hearing, all of a sudden, one day, hearing a voice inside me that said, call out to my son, call out to my son, call out to my son, call out to my son. And it was repetitive and overwhelming. Wow. And I said, okay, Jesus, please help me. And I always love when I get to that bit in the story because the next part of the story is that I was, of course, arrested. And it's not what people expect.
Jesus sent the police.
Yeah, that's right. But actually, that's what happened. And so I had been dealing drugs for many years. Throughout my entire childhood, I was exposed to crime. Dealing drugs was not something unusual to me. It was normal. I have many childhood memories of being in dealers' houses. It was just what it was. I was in relationships with dealers.
Wow.
And so I had been dealing drugs in London, in nightclubs, in gay nightclubs. I'd been selling ecstasy and speed and cocaine. And so I was arrested for that and locked up. And the moment that I stepped into that first prison cell, it was like this peace came over me and I knew it was over. I'd spent 24 years running and in such pain, and I knew that it was finally kind of finished and that this was going to be my opportunity to turn it around. And I then was not released from jail for 2 years. I was sentenced to 4 years and I ended up serving 2 years. And in that time, I gave my life to Jesus. I began to attend church, to read the Bible, to pray. I did therapy, 12-step programs, rehab. I just made use of every single resource that was available to me within prison, as well as asked all of the hard questions. And it was the first time in many years that I had no access to drugs and alcohol, and I had all my needs taken care of, and I was supported.
Wow.
And
wow. So it doesn't sound to me like you were gaming the system. Again, it was a genuine a genuine thing that you were going through and traveling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't really do better until you know better, I suppose. And my life is testament to that. As I've gone along trying to do the best that I can with the circumstances dealt to me. Whenever I've learnt or had an opportunity to be better, I've done that. And for me, you know, many people say there, but for the grace of God go I, when they talk about things like prison, like that could have happened to them. But for me, God absolutely placed me in this place.
There, by the grace of God went I.
exactly right, because he needed me. He needed time to get my attention. He needed enough time for me to make serious changes in my life, to be supported. All of that time, despite the life that I'd lived, I'd never had any type of counselling or therapy. My head was filled with all these lies about myself. I thought I was ugly. I thought I was actually deformed and repulsive. I had that much self-hatred because of the life that I'd lived. I just believed all of these lies, and I needed time to unpack all of those lies, to get a serious grip on reality, basically, and to think about what I was here for, what is life about, and how do I want to live my life.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Now, take us to, I guess, recent history. How long ago was it where you realised I was wrong about that court case?
That was only in the last couple of years. So,
and what brought that about?
Yeah, I was in prison almost 20 years ago now, and I had my first encounter with God then, and it changed me. But it took me a long time before I began to wholeheartedly walk out my Christianity. That only happened about 10 years ago. Yeah, that's right. Even though I had this really full-on supernatural encounter and was really changed by it, I think once I was released and sent back to Australia, I didn't quite know what to do with what I'd been given. And I was scared of becoming the thing that I mocked. So prior to my experience in Christianity, I actually mocked Christians. I thought they were weak, unintelligent, victims, needing a crutch, belonging to a cult.
Yep.
And then I knew that was a lie, but if I was going to fully become a Christian, then I was going to join that group of people that were mocked and denigrated by the world. And I think it took me a long time to really build up the courage to be able to wholeheartedly step out and go, actually, I'm willing to risk everything.
If you're looking for an easy road, there's easier ones.
Yeah, Christianity is not an easy road, actually. It's very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Especially if you don't like truth.
Yeah, it's against the grain. It's against the culture. It's Christians. I'm not talking about in this country, but globally, Christians are the most persecuted people in the world. Nobody wants to know that or acknowledge that, but that's the truth.
It's absolutely true.
You know, they're hated and denigrated, and I knew what that meant because that's who I had been.
We actually think there's, dark periods in way back when Christians were fed to the lions and put on stakes covered in pitch and set alight to illuminate Nero's garden parties, and they were the dark days for Christians. There's more Christians martyred now than in any time previous in history.
That's right.
Martyred, not just persecuted, but actually lay down their lives for Jesus' name. That's
right. Absolutely. And nobody talks about that. The media is not interested in it. It's an absolute shame that this is not acknowledged in the world today. And so I guess it just took me a long time to walk it out. I guess I needed some more pain. I needed to make sure 100% that there was no other way to this fount of satisfaction that I'd found, that Jesus was the only way. I needed to look a little bit more at New Age and some other different things and make sure that there was no easier way.
Yeah, right.
And then finally, about 10 years ago, wholeheartedly began to walk out my faith.
5 years ago.
10 years ago.
10 years ago, sorry, okay.
And as I began to wholeheartedly walk, so at the same time as the court case.
That was actually prior to or at the same time as the court case?
Same time.
Okay.
The same time as this court case was going on, I'm starting to wholeheartedly walk out my Christianity. And so a whole lot of things conspired to come together to give me revelation and open my eyes to the fact that I wasn't fully aware of a complete range of higher moral, philosophical and political ideas.
You and a lot of other Christians.
I didn't realize that I was so far positioned on the left. I didn't have an understanding of what the opposite of that might be, or what any other political position might really be. I didn't understand conservatism, libertarianism. I didn't understand what free speech meant. And so as this
Well, you'd never learn these kind of things in school. The last thing our public education teaches us about is how our nation works, how democracy, politics and philosophy work.
Correct, that's right. And so you grow up in your own bubble and you think that that's all correct until something comes and begins to challenge that. And so as I begin to walk out my Christianity wholeheartedly, I'm going through the court case, I'm starting to look into and become aware of other philosophical, political positions. I start to read into those and look into them. I start to read the Bible through in its entirety. And as I do this, my whole political position begins to shift, and my whole understanding of culture begins to shift. And the way that I view culture, I start to view it through the scriptures.
Brilliant.
And through the history of the world, which the Bible contains, and the different movements that go on throughout that. And everything just starts to get very messy for me as I begin to take on whole new identities.
Yeah.
It's like the old...
That's a beautiful mess though, isn't it?
It is a beautiful mess, an uncomfortable, beautiful mess that you need to really spend time figuring out. And I've spent the last 10 years, and part of that revelation was beginning to understand in the last 3 or 4 years what I'd actually done in terms of free speech. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. But what I would want to say to people who are in that same conversion space is that for some people that can be quick, but for me it was very slow. Yeah. I went through a 15-year conversion. The last 10 years have been the most uncomfortable, but it's kind of like you need to spend time coming to Christianity and coming to any type of conversion in discomfort. You need to understand that your old identity doesn't really fit anymore. Your new identity doesn't quite fit yet. And there'll be a period of time in the middle, but eventually that new identity will fit very well and you will be comfortable with it. It just takes time as you wrestle through this mess.
And so what kind of, I guess I want to explore one more issue that I've heard you articulate before I ask what I was just about to, and that is, tell me about how you now see the attitude you had before and what was wrong about that, specifically with regards to the word victimhood.
Right. So for me, victimhood is a huge thing, and it's why I often speak out against particular things, because I absolutely saw myself as a victim for many, many years. And I in some ways was justified in that because of the life that I'd lived. However, what I allowed that to do was to give me an excuse to justify all sorts of behaviours. So I could say, yes, I've done terrible things. I've dealt drugs. I've done all these things. But look at my life. It wasn't my fault. Right down to smaller things, I could justify all sorts of behaviour that's just not great because of the victim mentality that I held. And while I held a victim mentality, I blamed everybody else. It kept me stuck in anger and resentment and unforgiveness. So I could never really move forward until I acknowledged my part in everything. And becoming a Christian meant that the positions in my mind were flipped. Instead of me being the victim, Christianity forced me to look at all the ways in which I was a perpetrator.
Wow.
And when I began to do that and see myself as the perpetrator, as the wretch, rather than as the victim, I was able to take responsibility for my behaviours, to forgive everybody that had hurt me, to stop judging everybody. And that's when I actually experienced true freedom.
Wow.
And was able to move forward into my future,
and that's
not carrying all this baggage.
That's the promise, isn't it? That's why you would go through this, is because it's in finding yourself truly honestly looking at yourself and the world as it really is, not as you wish it was, that's when you actually get freedom. That one of the best things you can experience is bad feelings, feeling bad about yourself, if you let that catalyze a positive change.
Yes.
If that says, I'm now going to become a better person, I'm now going to become a bigger person, I'm going to evolve, I'm going to mature, I'm going to continue this journey. Life isn't an arrival, it's a journey. And we're always getting better. And Christianity itself isn't a status symbol of holiness, perfection, or some holy club. It's actually a confession that I am lost without the author of truth. I am lost without an objective, eternal perspective on who I am and who I need to become. It's the word you used, freedom, is actually the exciting part of why we would want to go on this journey. And if anybody considers themselves intellectually honest and wanting to approach politics, philosophy, and reality with an intellectually honest lens, there's no better way than a Christian perspective that's authored by someone outside of the human experience. It's the most complete picture of who we are possible.
That's right. I love that Christianity forced me to see myself as the wretch, because what that then did was make me see that there's no victim identity in Christianity.
Right.
You can't be the victim in it.
Yep.
You have to take responsibility for everything you've ever done. And that was great.
Yep.
That sense of me being the perpetrator, me having to take responsibility, set me free. And I guess underlining everything that I speak about and push out into the world today is that desire for everybody to experience that freedom.
Yes,
Christian or not. You don't have to be a Christian to break out of your victim mentality. Those things, forgiveness, letting go of bitterness and resentment, and stopping judgment, sets everybody free, regardless of being a Christian or not.
And that's exactly why I do this show, is because it's like, if you've got this truth, if you've got this freedom, like, how dare you keep it to yourself? It's the most selfish, hateful thing you could do, to leave your neighbour or your 25 million neighbours stumbling around in the darkness. It's like, it's okay if we disagree. I'm not taking it personally if somebody hates me because I'm a Christian or a conservative or whatever pigeonhole you want to put me in. All I'm interested in is truth. If you've got truth, let's talk about it, because I want it. Do you? Because that's exactly what we want to share. This is freedom. How do we make our nation better? How do we make our neighbours' lives better? Some of the recent debates that we've had, people ask, what's it got to do with you? Well, that's not the test for public interest. That's it's actually, we need to take an interest in each other's lives, because we're a society, we're a community. We knit together, we build together, we move forward together. Now, one of the other things that I've really been moved by, now I don't want to say impressed, it's more than that. There's some truth and there's some freedom here that I think is absolutely powerful for Australia. And this is a message I would, especially if I can get this up before Australia Day, the work of art you did with, you'll have to tell me the exact number of emu feathers that got taken off to, was it Queensland Museum?
Yes.
Is that still there? I might have to go see if I can see it. Is it on display, do you know?
Yeah, I don't think it's on display, but it's in their collection. So
that's terrible.
Yeah.
I want to go see it.
They bought it, which was amazing.
Wow, that's awesome. But
yeah,
I'll show the photo of it right now. I forgive you, in these massive letters. Tell me about the message of forgiveness, especially as we approach Australia Day, especially as someone who at least partly identifies as Aboriginal Australian.
Personally, I believe that forgiveness is the greatest tool that God's given us. It's the tool that ultimately sets us free. It's when we see ourselves as a wretch and then we ask for forgiveness and we are given forgiveness freely, that's when we can begin to give it out, and that sets us free from everything that's holding us back in terms of anger, resentment, and blame. And so I made that particular artwork, I Forgive You, quite a few, I think 2012. It was a response to Kevin Rudd's apology. And so, because I thought that's the response that's missing.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I've been thinking. And everybody I know has been thinking for ages. Like, I wasn't there, you weren't there, but we've apologised so many times. Not just Kevin Rudd. I've been in countless church services where we've apologised and repented and wept with our Aboriginal brothers and sisters. And like, what we want more than anything is reconciliation. But can it ever happen without forgiveness?
I don't believe so. And I think that's what's driving the woundedness in this country, and that's what's driving the disadvantage and dysfunction in Aboriginal communities, is this sense of anger, resentment and bitterness towards this country. And I believe it's also covering up and enabling people to not take responsibility for a lot of terrible behaviours that's going on within Aboriginal communities. For example, in the last 9 days, 5 Aboriginal children committed suicide. They got to a point in their lives where they believed that death was better than life. So that's a terrible symptom of what's going on in these communities. Yeah. Now, I think a time has already come and gone where colonisation has needed to be acknowledged. Now it's being used to disempower and perpetuate a victim mentality that stops people from taking responsibility. I don't think that's a popular opinion, but I think that's truth.
And how is that being received in the Aboriginal community that's in your circle of influence, in your network?
Yeah, so I know of a few outspoken people who are on board with that, but I would say that the majority of the Aboriginal community, particularly in the inner cities and the urban communities, are not. They are not interested in this. There's a real push for the fact that all of the problems today in Aboriginal communities are due to intergenerational trauma because of colonisation and the stolen generations.
How much do you harmonise with or agree with the message that Candace Owens is preaching in America, that the left of politics, the Democrat Party in America and the Labor Party, Greens here in Australia, are actually perpetuating a kind of slavery of black people in the fact that they're essentially employing them as useful idiots, to put another famous leftist's term, Lenin, describing people who are supporting an agenda and a party without actually knowing what's driving it, what's behind it, and the true nature of what's going on. And Candace Owens, a black woman, is basically saying, look, I used to be like you, I used to think like you, but it's time to leave the plantation. It's time to get off and stop being dictated to on how to think by the Democrat Party. You know, we're not victims, we're responsible for our own destiny and future and culture, and we need to keep growing and keep moving forward and not be stuck in the past.
And stop looking to the government to save us. I 100% am on board with what Candace Owens says, so much so that right now I'm making an entirely new artwork out of feathers, same, probably bigger, maybe 15 metres long, out of about 25,000 emu feathers. Wow. That spells out welfare is slavery.
Brilliant, brilliant, yeah.
Because I 100% believe with what she's saying. I feel like there's a place for welfare. However, it can become a form of disempowering slavery. Yeah. And underneath that message is, again, this idea of personal responsibility and freedom. Like the government is not where we need to turn to save us. It's actually a very low expectation on people if they're saying, this is your fault, our problems are your fault, we don't have to fix them, you have to come in and fix them. Yep. It's really, really disempowering to trust the government in this way. The government is not to be trusted in this way. It's a dangerous thing, and the only way change is going to happen within Indigenous communities is if it arises from within the communities.
So true, Bindi. I'm so glad you're saying this, and I genuinely pray for the sake of our nation, and especially, you know, my Aboriginal brothers and sisters, that they get this, that they hear this path to freedom. You know, that leave the mission. You know, stop being patronised. Because the power, when you look to other people for responsibility, you give them your power. If you ask them to take responsibility for something going wrong in your life, you've given away the power that you should own and keep for yourself.
Absolutely, 100% agree.
I could totally get the community thing. We should try and solve problems together, and we're stronger together. But that doesn't mean you abdicate responsibility and look outside yourself. You have to start looking inside yourself, and then it's let's build this country together, because the people that are hating the national symbols of Australia, including Australia Day, are tearing us down, and they're tearing us down. That includes themselves. That's everything about Australia, and it's heartbreaking because it's divisive, destructive, it's full of resentment. Like the bitter fruit on this tree of blacktivism is really, really sad to see. And we could be doing so much better and moving so much forward more positively and together. We have to take that. That's the message from me, and I hear it from you. And unfortunately, because I'm as white as the driven snow, you're going to be more credible for it. But even then, people are rejecting it because it's not the message they want to hear. That the power is yours, don't give it away. There's freedom in forgiveness. Thank you so much for the courage that you're showing. I'm sure there's some repercussions in the art world for somebody being right of Mao.
Yeah, you know, I'm not sure how my career is going to pan out in the next few years after coming out and speaking particularly into free speech and these type of Indigenous issues and all of this kind of conservative side of life. But I think for me it's more important that I am genuine and have integrity and speak the truth, not my truth, the truth.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
Regardless of the consequences.
It's admirable because it's ironic that the art world would normally celebrate a narrated journey for an artist, unless that journey takes them to uncomfortable places which confront something in the art world like leftism is corrupt.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on and having a chat with me, and hopefully it's not the last.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Bindi Cole Chocka. State Summit is now only 4 weeks away. It starts on the 22nd of February, and that's here in Brisbane. And you can get your tickets now. The early bird price is 25% off the full price, and they're available for a little while longer at churchandstate.com.au. The purpose of the summit is arming Christians to influence culture. And that's really important, that we know how to declare truth in the public square. As we just discussed with Bindi, it's all about freedom, and freedom for our neighbours, and justice and truth. And this isn't the kind of thing we should keep to ourselves, which is why Jesus said, let your light shine and make sure you flavour the world around you. That's the commission that we've been given, and that's the purpose of the Church and State Summit, to equip us and empower us to be better informed about the issues that are affecting all of us and our 25 million neighbours, and to be better involved in being part of the solution. That's it for this episode of Pellowe Talk. And as always, subscribe to all of the places you can find me on social media: YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Parlay, that new channel. I'm there under the address Dave Pellowe. And don't forget to go to davepellowe.com, sign up to the email updates, so no matter where I get kicked off, you'll always be able to find me and get the latest news. And until then, keep commenting.